As welcoming remarks by our CEO, Ambassador Jim Zumwalt, will be starting shortly. Thank you. Please take your seats. Thank you.
Check, check, check. Good morning, everyone. How are you doing? My name is Jim Zumwalt. I'm the CEO of Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA, and we're delighted to have you come today to the 5th annual conference that Sasakawa hosts every year in the United States on U.S. Japan security relations. Today, our theme is deepening ties while confronting new challenges. And we very much hope that today will be a wonderful opportunity to assess the state of the U.S.-Japan Security Alliance, but also to look at some of the challenges we face in the future and to assess how we might continue to strengthen our security alliance. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, I wanted to recognize 3 special guests. First of all, we have, coming from Tokyo, Sasakawa Peace Foundation Chairman Nobuo Tanaka, and also from Tokyo, Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA President and Sasakawa Executive Director Junko Chano. And also I wanted to recognize former Secretary of Agriculture, Dan Glickman, who's doing a wonderful job promoting congressional exchanges. So I believe he's somewhere here in the audience too. And finally, before we start introduce the keynote speaker, I did want to mention, for those of you who are tweeting, we do have a Twitter handle, hashtag US Japan Security, so we hope you'll use that if you're tweeting about today's events. But now I'd like to introduce our very special guest and keynote speaker, Ambassador Shinsuke Sugiyama, who is Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Japan to the United States of America. He arrived here in January. Ambassador Sugiyama has a long career in the foreign ministry of over 40 years. I think you have his bio in your materials, so I'm not going to read everything he did because that would take the whole half hour. But let me just mention that he has extraordinary expertise on a wide range of issues. He has served his country in Seoul, in Washington, in Cairo, so he really has an expertise on the Middle East, on Northeast Asia, on U.S.-Japan security, and on United Nations issues. He served for many years as Director General for Asia, where he was responsible for Japan's relationships with China, North and South Korea. And most recently, he was Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs at the Foreign Ministry prior to coming to this assignment. So now, if we could please join me in giving a warm welcome to Ambassador Sugiyama.
Ambassador Zumwalt and everybody gathering here for this morning, and ladies and gentlemen. Well, Jim, thank you very much indeed for your nice introduction about myself. Jim and I spent quite a number of times. To begin with, I think I can tell you that among these times which we share, one of the really unforgettable moment was March 11, really the time when we had catastrophe. And that was the time when Jim and I and others discussing something which I don't think I can disclose to you because that still is something we wouldn't be able to make it open. Normal sort of thing between US and Japan, kind of behind-the-scene secret talks, by the way. At the time, I was, I think, a Director General for Asia or something, and he was a DCM, Deputy Chief of Mission in the US Embassy. But anyway, that afternoon, all of a sudden, I think that was something like 2 minutes to 3 p.m. or something. We are just taken aback by the huge earthquake being felt even in Tokyo. So we stopped talking about what we did behind the scene, and then that got started everything. I'm not here to tell you what was all about Tomodachi operation, something that you guys helped us a lot. Then Ambassador and the people like him, DCM and others. Today, I'm being asked by Jim and others that I have to speak up something about U.S. Japan or something about what is going on in my region. I'm honored to be here following in the footsteps of my Prime Minister Abe, who gave a keynote speech at Sasakawa. I think that was 3 years ago or something. I was with him in my previous capacity. I think that was the time when I was a deputy foreign minister or something. But I remember that event very clearly. And I happen to know Mr. Sasakawa, who is the top of the whole foundation. I try to see him from time to time to be given some of his hunches, what's going on, and to be given whole sorts of books which I have read, written by him. Sasakawa has become a great partner for us in strengthening the foundation of our alliance, and we are grateful to you, your whole team, and Jim, Mr. Ambassador. So thank you very much, and all of you gathered here this morning. It's only been a little over just a month since I became a new envoy to the United States of America, being sent by my government. My wife and I have been warmly welcomed. Indeed, I am feeling the warmth you've given to us is really tremendous. All by people from all walks of life and from U.S. friends and colleagues, old and new. On my second day in Washington, D.C., I made my debut speech from the podium at the Warner Theater at the opening ceremony of the National Cherry Blossoms Festival this year, which just ended just 1 week ago or something. You have no idea how many cherry blossom events there actually are. It's really, really something astounding. I was, as I am going to mention, I happen to have been stationed here in Washington, D.C. some 30 years ago or something as a young diplomat for secretary in the econ section and the general section and something and political section. Yes, indeed, there were already cherry blossoms festivities there. At that time, I think I was working for Ambassador Matsunaga or Murata or Kuriyama or these people. But I think I can assure you that now the cherry blossom festivity seems to have that much grown up, which I didn't realize until I came here as a new envoy to the United States of America. It is really, really amazing, and I'm very much stunned. Another thing is that that was only on my third working day on the job. I was given the privilege to be able to be received by your president, President Trump, to present my letter of credential, which really, I'm told, is almost record time. If you live in the world of diplomatic people and DOS or Foreign Services, somebody, it might take, normally it takes 2 months or 3 months. In some place in the kingdoms, it might take just 1 year or something. So mind you, that was only third working day when I was given the privilege to see your president, the head of the state, to present a letter of credential being given His Majesty and Mr. Prime Minister and Mr. Foreign Minister. So that was really, really, again, a standing record. Then I headed straight into preparations for the meetings of leaders in Palm Beach, Mar-a-Lago, followed by the defense minister's visit, as well as deputy prime minister's visit as finance minister. Eager to start connecting beyond the Beltway, I also did a West Coast tour, visiting Japanese-American leaders and the National Japanese-American Museum in Los Angeles, and going to go to join another cherry blossom festival in San Francisco. Therefore, I now rode twice in nice open car. One was a 1948 really, really good, gigantic American-made open car here in Washington, D.C., in eastern side of this country, and then newly made gorgeous convertible Ford in San Francisco. So I think I can claim to you that I did twice, both in eastern side as well western side, a ride in open car to say hello to everybody in the course of the cherry blossom festivities. Somewhere in there, I went to Richmond to meet Virginia's governor and to Maryland to meet its governor, as well as their first ladies. And I also went to Fredericksburg, Texas, for the rededication of the Japanese Peace Garden at the National Museum of the Pacific War. I came back from D.C. just only 2 or 3 days ago or something. I only just stayed overnight there. I've been rather so busy going to see many people, not inside Beltway, but outside, from west to east and Texas. Of course, this is after all the United States of America. I've never been all of the 50 states, but I am about to, sooner than later. That's presumably, I'm convinced that the important function on the part of the envoy from Japan to the States. The point I'm leading up to, however, is that while still in Japan, I would also say U.S.-Japan relationship has never been better. Imagine my great relief when this actually turned out to be true. I found out indeed that that turned out to be the case after I just came to Washington just over a month ago or something. After everything I did, everywhere I went, these first months, I am happy to report, really, the relations have never been better. Let me begin by talking a bit about some areas of common concern that came up during the recent meeting between President Trump and my Prime Minister Abe in Mar-a-Lago. Generally, let me say that the Mar-a-Lago meeting had a very good atmosphere to it. Our leaders played, of course, golf again, and even had a cheeseburger to bite. I don't know whether you could call it cheeseburger diplomacy rather than golf diplomacy, but they spent a long time, I think altogether 7 hours or something, together and had a very, very good and in-depth discussions about which I think I was involved. Of course, I was not able to involve their discussions at the time, and two leaders and their first ladies had a nice, gorgeous dinner alone by themselves, only with the interpreters. And of course, I was not able to join when they played golf on the cart and on the green. But otherwise, I think I was there with my Prime Minister, so I think I can be in a position to tell how rich and how really spontaneous and how their friendships evolved based upon already very good personal relations between the two leaders. When the president was in Japan in November, I was still vice minister at the top of the bureaucracy. There was a photo in the papers of him giving the prime minister a first bump. I think that might be a good analogy for their relationship, a reflection of the trust and camaraderie they have developed over the last year and a half. We believe their relation is positive and really, really productive. One example is that the President Trump affirmed that he would urge Kim Jong-un for prompt release of Japanese abductees. You saw that joint press conference immediately after the Mar-a-Lago meeting, I think the first evening. The second evening after working lunch or something. That was your president, Donald Trump. Mr. President started saying at the outset that he should stand ready to do what he can do to urge North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to release these abductees. And my Prime Minister, it is only natural, felt very much thankful, and he felt a deep kind of, kind of friendship and bonds from the U.S. President. This is very important to us, and so many people in this country don't understand how deeply the issue runs in Japan. But I do believe that by that presidential statement, I think the understanding seems to have become much, much deeper. But imagine if American citizens were abducted from beaches in Maine or Oregon or kidnapped from their homeland. What would your people feel? That's exactly what is happening. Oh, by the way, yesterday and just before I came here, I was with the Education and Science Minister, Hayashi, and today I'm going to host a dinner for Minister Kato, who is in charge of the issue, together with the abductee families and their supporters at my beautiful residence. Now, two leaders, as I was about to say, strongly agreed that Japan and the U.S. Continue to be fully aligned on everything, including things concerning North Korea, which seems to be the most immediate question now. We are in complete agreement, in sync, on maintaining the maximum pressure against North Korea and not rewarding them just because they accepted talks. My Prime Minister has been saying repeatedly that we have no intention to be engaged in talks for the sake of talks. Talks must be necessary indeed, but talks must be done in such a way to achieve something that we must achieve. This includes keeping the pressure on to dismantle all their weapons of mass destructions. I repeat, all their weapons of mass destruction, including nuke, chemical, and biological, and also all ranges of ballistic missiles. I repeat, all ranges of ballistic missiles, not only ICBM type, not only IRBM type, but including all from short, medium, and long. We would like to see the possible U.S.-North Korean summit meeting become a true historic one by resolving all these issues, such as I put an emphasis upon all of the weapons of mass destruction, all ranges of ballistic missiles, and all of these abductees who are still somewhere in DPRK. After South Korea's president had met with the North Korean leader, we saw that happened in Panmunjom some days ago. I noticed that the President Trump tweeted that he had talked to President Moon and that he had also spoken to my Prime Minister Abe to inform him of the ongoing negotiations. That is the way it is supposed to work. I have negotiated with the North Koreans behind the scene or on the spot when I was directly involved. I once met with my opposite number in Ulaanbaatar, and we are about to, reach some sort of tentative agreement, but that was in vain. Why? Because after my meeting, I think that was just only a fortnight, something after that meeting, they detonated nuke. So we couldn't help but to at least stop that negotiation, which was resumed after some time, but in vain. I have to say I'm surprised how quickly things on the surface level at least have changed. at least on the surface level, yes, indeed. When I was told by my Prime Minister that I should be heading for Washington as a new envoy, maybe my Prime Minister and the leadership must have thought that something might happen because I was told that I should be in Washington, D.C. as a new envoy by sometime this March or something in spring. But I can assure you that no one did anticipate this much happening after Pyeongchang Olympics and Paralympics or something. So this is in that context that I really, really praise South Korean people as well as, in particular, South Korean leader Moon Jae-in, who is a person who has brought things up to this much. As President Trump also tweeted last week, only time will tell. Let me say a few words about alliance security, which will require further strengthening of the alliance's deterrence capabilities. Japan, for its part, is at a critical juncture this year as we formulate new national defense program guidelines and midterm defense planning. My Prime Minister Abe has said the new guidelines will be based on an honest assessment of the aggravated security situation that Japan finds itself in today and in my region. At sea, in the air, and on the ground, and even in new domains like space and cyber, we have ongoing cooperation between our two countries' forces. I actually met with General Mattis, and I met with the Marine Corps General Top, and I am about to see everybody in at least 4 forces. We are escorting U.S. air and marine assets in mission based upon the newly activated law, which was approved by the Diet some time ago, just quite recent. We are working together in missile defense. We are about to introduce some new certain system, Aegis Ashore, as soon as possible. We are conducting joint trainings and exercises as much as we can. Given today's security challenges, the role of U.S. forces in Japan, USFJ, is growing. It is really utmost important for us to have it functioning. And every time I speak about such things as ambassador, I try to express my government's deep appreciation for the dedication of USFJ to the security of Japan, and not only security of Japan, but the entire region in my theater. By the way, this is not only the foundation for the security policy of Japan, but I do hope that Americans do feel that it is for your own sake, for the role that the U.S. is able to play, for your own sake and for the sake of the region and for the sake of the whole sort of international community. Given today's security challenges, the role of U.S. forces in Japan is really, really important, as I said. And every time I speak such things as ambassador, really I repeat that we are deeply thankful of the dedication on the part of the U.S. and USFJ. Securing the stable stationing of U.S. forces in Japan has become even more critical, which is why the alliance must work even harder to reduce the impact of those forces on local communities. I repeat, on local communities. It's also critical that the bilateral plan to realign U.S. forces, including the FTEMA replacement facility, be expeditiously implemented. I believe the Abe government has proven its commitment to this plan through more than 5 years to work. In talking about security and alliance, let me say something about our biggest neighbor, China. As you know, China, using its economic clout and military strength, has expanded its influence not only in East Asia, but all over the world. I told a group the other day that these islands they are building in international waters are really aircraft carriers made of sand. The bottom line for us, the alliance is to make sure that the existing world and region order be upheld, while inviting China to play a constructive role being based upon the set of rules of international law. The vast oceans connecting Asia to Africa should enjoy a stable, predictable regional order. With a free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, Japan has been working to promote rule of law, as I said, freedom of navigation, economic connectivity, and security cooperation. We look forward to cooperation with the U.S. and, of course, others like Indians and Australians on these efforts as well. Now, finally, let me touch on the direction of our trade relationship, which should be not something regarded as some link with security issue, but I agree that we have to see things in its totality when it comes to U.S.-Japan relationship. So I don't think I can speak that side of the matter of the one coin. We believe, of course, that the U.S. should come back to TPP. That's exactly what my Prime Minister told Mr. President. Unfortunately, of course, Mr. President didn't say yes. I know what Mr. President and the people like Bob Lighthizer, USTR, and others have been telling us. And as you might know, at the recent summit in Mar-a-Lago, both leaders agreed to start free, fair, reciprocal trade deal talks. By the way, I really remembered very much vividly at the time when Mr. President spoke up about this new kind of framework under the banner of number two's leadership, meaning Deputy Prime Minister Aso and Vice President Pence. One of the cabinet officers, Mr. Motegi, is supposed to lead the way on behalf of Japan, and Bob Lighthizer, the USTL, is his opposite number. They are about to get started to find how and when and what we are able to find the way out between U.S. saying bilateral is very much important, while Japanese saying that TPP is the best solution. I don't know how we can find out the way out, but we must, and I will. We have taken careful note of the Trump administration concern on bilateral trade, and we hope that through these talks we will be able to find a mutually beneficial way out, as I have been telling you. President Trump is quite focused on jobs, and last year Japan was the #1 foreign job creator in the United States of America. We also invested more money in the US last year than any other country, over $45 billion US. I don't want to bog down into details about the trade talks or trade figures or something, but let me just point out two symbolic figures. One is, yes, indeed. When I was stationed here some 30 years ago or something as the first secretary in charge of the bilateral trade for 2 years or something, that time Japan was #1, the trade surplus or trade deficit country. Always they say 50 billion. And that was a time when our kind of percentage ratio in terms of the number of whole sort of U.S. trade deficit, our share was, if my memory is correct, over half, 50%. Now, the figure is amounted to something like 68.9 billion, something like slightly less than 70 or so. Fortunately, our place is, I think, become third, being exceeded by Mexicans and somebody. I thought that was Germany, but that was not Germans, but I think that was done by a Mexican, to be followed by Germans. But the point which I really would like to make is that, yes, trade deficit is something slightly less than 70 or so. At the same time, export from America by Japanese made or by Japan is amounted to something like 75.7 billion US dollars. Balance is plus 6.8 billion. I don't want to make any sort of comparison with the numbers of what Germans are doing, let alone what Chinese are doing. The numbers tell you, you can see the vast differences. I wouldn't say only Germans, but if you can take a look at the numbers in comparison to what Chinese are doing, the end result is obvious. Another figure which I tried to tell you this morning is, yes, indeed, when I was here as a young diplomat dealing with so-called trade frictions between the two, that was a time, by the way, after Bob Lighthizer deputy, the figures like Lynn Williams, these people. Indeed, that was a time when we exported Japan-made car as much as something like 3.5 million units cars. Export. How much we manufactured at that time was only 600 to 20,000 units, so slightly more than half. The figure is something like 1 versus 8. Now, take a look at the current figure. We make in the States, whatever, Toyota, Honda, or every sort of car manufacturing companies, US made by utilizing US workers, by utilizing most of the US sort of parts. The amount is slightly about 40 million. While the export number from Japan as a car complete is less than 2 million. The exact number is 1.74 million. So the number shows that when I was here, or late 1980s, the number was 1.8. Now the number is the other way around, 1 to 2. So of course people try to rebut these arguments in something. Yes, indeed, that does exist rather not a small number, like something like slightly less than 70 billion. But as I told you, at the time when I was here, the percentage ratio was, I think, something more than 50. Now, the percentage ratio is only something like 8.6 or so. So I know Jim is just waiting to tell me that it's about for me to up things up. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have packed my first 40 days into a short speech. That is harder than packing my wife and my life up to move from Tokyo to the United States of America. I have much more to talk to you, but because of Jim standing here to tell me that I have to finish oh, no, you can stand that. I'm about to finish all my stupid speech this morning. Just let me thank you for inviting me to this podium. I don't think I am the person who can replace my Prime Minister who was standing here at this podium 3 years ago or something, but I feel very much honored to be with you this morning. Thank you all. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, Ambassador. That was wonderful. Thank you. No, thank you very much. If I could ask you all to remain in your seats as we get the stage ready for our next panel on North Korea. As Ambassador Sugiyama mentioned, our relationship, our alliance with Japan is very strong, but we have many challenges going forward, and one of them is how do we work together to manage the challenges stemming from North Korea's nuclear and missile programs and its recent diplomatic offensive. And so it was wonderful to hear Ambassador Sugiyama's comments on how Japan and the United States at the leadership level are working together to coordinate our positions to make sure that we take advantage of the strength of our alliance in dealing with these issues. So if I could ask for one more round of applause for Ambassador Sugiyama. And I'm sure that when we invite him back next year, after 1 year in the United States, he'll have even more to say about the issue. So thank you very much. And just hold on just 1 second. We'll get the stage set up and get going on our next presentation. Thank you.
How are you? I see him, but I never see you anymore. Guys, ready? Are we starting right now? Okay. No? 9:30? Yeah. We start. Okay. Sure.
I'll give you a couple more minutes just to come in at the back. A couple more seconds. Well, thanks everyone so much for being here today. And we're delighted to kick off with the first panel. Really glad to see you all. And very glad to be with my esteemed panelists. Thank you very much indeed. And particularly delighted by the topic of this morning's discussion, which is called Recent Developments, which is really what it had to be called, because of course this was planned for a while and so much has happened since then. One of the sort of symbolic things that I've enjoyed seeing is I was at the DMZ last year, as I'm sure many of you have visited, and I was subjected to that blare of music. And already the so-called propaganda music has been dismantled on Saturday. The clocks are changing in Pyongyang. And so we're seeing a lot of symbolic gestures, and with the panel perhaps we can discuss how real they might be and what they might be leading to, if anything at all. I have with me Dr. Sue Mi Terry, who has been an analyst at the CIA, senior analyst on Korea issues, and director for Korea at the NSC under both George W. Bush and the Obama administration. She's now at CSIS. Mr. Wataru Sawamura, who is Washington, D.C. bureau chief at Asahi Shimbun, who's going to talk a little bit about how the Japanese public sees the dimensions of so-called recent developments. And Dr. Kongdan Oh, Katie, who is Senior Asia Specialist at the Institute for Defense Analyses, who has lots of interesting things to say as well, particularly regarding the recent summit. I think we'll take each of you in order for a few minutes, maybe to lay out how you see things, and then I'll ask a few questions, and finally we'll throw it open to the floor at the end. Please do catch my eye at any moment if you might have a question. Dr. Sue,
Yes.
perhaps we can start by asking you if this summit with President Trump is really going to happen, and if so, what do we expect from it?
Oh my God. Okay. Yes, it will happen because I think both President Trump and Kim Jong-un wants to make this happen. And I think Kim Jong-un has really shifted, at least tactic. We'll see if it's a true strategy or not, but at least tactically he has now, he's on this path of peace offensive. And look at all the summitry, and he met with Xi Jinping and now President Moon and so on. So I think it's going to happen, and I think now my prediction is it's going to be DMZ. But there are a lot of questions, obviously, in terms of what's going to happen beyond the fact that they're going to meet. When you look at the Inter-Korea summit that just happened, and I have to tell you, as someone who grew up in South Korea, as a North Korea analyst who spent my career watching North Korea, when I saw the North Korean leader crossing the demilitarized zone to the south and stepping foot into South Korea, it was a historic moment. It was momentous, it was moving, it was emotional. So I grant them all this. But again, what after, right? There's a lot of symbolism. And when you look at the piece, the document, the Panmunjom document, and I'm sure Katie's going to talk a little bit about it. But it's interesting because the order was improve inter-Korea relations, peace settlement, and then denuclearization was last. It was kind of reversed order. And when you look at the denuclearization part, which is obviously where we don't quite have an agreement on what that means, right? Obviously, from the US perspective, denuclearization is CIVID, complete, verifiable, irreversible disarmament of the North Korea's nuclear program. But traditionally and historically, North Korea has always said, they always said we are committed to denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula if the regime security is guaranteed, if the US hostile policy has ended, and so on. So they have always included South Korea as part of this, right? So the translation of that is if there is an end of US-South Korea alliance, perhaps if there is an end of US troops getting out of South Korea, if there's an end of extended nuclear umbrella the US has over South Korea and Japan, because that's the way the regime feels secure. So that's how we give them a regime security. And then they will talk about denuclearization. So again, I don't think that's clear yet. I think the South Koreans are saying, yes, Kim Jong-un is now interested in CIVID, but that's not clear until we sit down, until President Trump sits down with Kim Jong-un. And of course, there are all these past pledges and declarations. That goes back to 1972, there's 1992, there's 2007. So it's not overly new. I don't see anything that's why I say there are more questions that are raised about what's going to happen with Trump and Kim summit. There are several scenarios that I think that we can look at. I think the first scenario, obviously, is the sort of the toughest scenario. If President Trump sits down with Kim and sort of says, CIVID, or we're going to go home, or nothing kind of thing, or there's something that could be in between. And I think challenge would be what happens if North Korea offers something that does protect U.S. homeland in a way that President Trump can then sort of come out and say, to his supporters that I accomplished something that no other predecessor was able to accomplish. And so what if North Koreans do offer something like a stop on the intercontinental ballistic missile program, on the long-range program, but not on the medium or short-range missiles, obviously. Then Japan and South Korea is not really protected under that. But still, President Trump can sort of say he can still spin it as something that he was able to deliver. And then there is some other sort of even less than that, a little bit of muddled outcome. Now, I do think the key question here is Kim Jong-un a changed man? Did he just wake up one day after 2017, right? I mean, since he came into power for 6.5 years ago, he conducted 90 ballistic missile tests, almost 90, 20 last year alone. He did 4 out of 6 nuclear tests, we know this, right? Including hydrogen bomb test, which is 17 times more powerful than the one that flattened Hiroshima. He did 3 ICBM tests last year. He thinks, and this is why in the New Year's editorial, he came out and said it, and North Korea said repeatedly that they have completed their nuclear program. So I think another concern is that North Koreans are coming into this meeting thinking somehow they're coming into this meeting from position of strength because they have completed their program, because they have shown ICBM capability that could reach all over mainland United States. Whereas in U.S. are coming into this meeting feeling like, well, maybe it was maximum pressure, it was sanctions, it was all this talk of limited strike, bloody nose. So there's a little bit even of a different perspective from Washington and Pyongyang coming into this meeting. So I'm concerned about that, and I'm concerned that Kim Jong-un didn't just wake up one day and say, well, after now I'm 95% done with my nuclear program, I'm going to truly give it all up. I would be shocked if that's the case, but we'll see. But my concern is that, I'm just going to wrap it up now, but my concern is that both parties have an incentive to meet, and they will be able to walk out of the meeting, and I call it a success. And I'm sure that's most likely what's going to happen. But what will happen afterwards? And I think the important part is also the timeline, right? So I think from Washington's perspective, because there's a concern and skepticism that Kim Jong-un is trying to buy time or wait out the Trump administration and has an incentive to really drag this out, as a long process, that our incentive is to have a more kind of expedited time frame. So if they are saying, okay, we are serious about denuclearization, then okay, when does the verification begin? When can we go into North Korea? Is it 2 months? Is it 3 months? And so on. But we'll see. But my bet is that it's at least initially going to be successful. Whether it's long-term successful remains to be seen.
Thank you. Well, do we have an even more cynical view than that from the Japanese public?
Okay.
Can I ask you to say a few words?
Thank you very much. Anyhow, first of all, thank you very much for ambassadors, Kathleen, and those panels and everyone. It's a great honor to join this discussion with so many distinguished experts on East Asia security issues. Probably I am the only participant who is not an expert in East Asian securities. But Sasakawa USA asked me to share my insight on the Japanese public views in the recent development with North Korea. So probably one of my point is that I am the only person who is a citizen which is threatened by the North Korean missile and the North Korean threat. And then also, please bear in mind that my speech, the content of my speech are not my personal views and do not represent the Asahi Shimbun's view nor the position of Japan. So due to the complicated and sensitive subject matter, I might conduct the Q&A session in Japanese. I understand very excellent translators working for us today. And so about the Japanese response, okay. Sorry, it's a little bit noisy here. Okay. So,
for the audience.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So, according to the opinion polls conducted by the Asahi on April, when asked if they expected positive outcome of the U.S. North Korean summit will take place, 50% of Japanese said yes, and the 44% said no. So, Yomiuri Shimbun's poll asked also same in April if the international community should emphasize this dialogue or pressure in order to convince North Korea to give up nuclear and missile testing. The response was equally in favor of both responses, with 46% saying they preferred dialogue and 45% saying they prefer pressure. So although their expectation and the dialogue responses outnumber the no expectation and pressure response. The polls demonstrate that most of the Japanese public are not so much enthusiastic about the announcement of the summit, or probably more confusing. So people are hoping that things will get better, but they're watching the situation with a skeptical eye as well. It goes without saying that a lot of promise and agreement made by North Korea over the last 25 years have been broken, and the negotiation have failed. So my colleague, journalists in Tokyo and in Seoul, who regularly follows Japanese politics and Korean issues, expressed me their concerns. So one of these is a consistent underestimation towards South Korea and the Moon Jae-in government. Japan tends to make light of the Mr. Moon's negotiation capabilities. So they say that South Korea is too naive to conduct a complicated negotiation with a dictator, that it always shifts its stances and opinions, that it is being exploited by North Korea to buy time, that it is ignored by the Trump administration, and so on. We have to also point out that Mr. Abe's administration took advantage of the crisis to achieve their political goal. So Mr. Abe's LDP won a great victory in the last October snap elections. The main reason they were victorious was, of course, the fragmentation of the opposition parties, but also Mr. Abe's description of North Korea's behavior as a national crisis and his pledge for maximum pressure on North Korea, without a doubt, boosted his popularities. But in such political and social frenzy, I fear that Japan's ability to carefully observe and analyze the development event with a rational attitude was undermined. Though I am not in the position to defend the Japanese government, I have to say the Japanese officials might have foreseen the current development on the Korean peninsula. I still remember to read the article in the Asahi last December that wrote Japanese officials predicted at the LDP meeting that North Korea would turn their stance more towards dialogue from the beginning of 2018. So this indeed became true, but according to my colleague who wrote the article, those who attended the meeting were not enthusiastic towards the prediction and seems indifferent. So 4 months have passed since then, and a lot of things have happened, changed, are still changing. So now in Japan, arguments are divided between the game is almost over and Japan will be left behind, or we should not trust North Korea and Japan should keep being a hardliner. So it seems that North Korea takes fair advantage of these split opinions in order to try to get a good deal from Japan. So I think healthy argument is not a bad thing, but we have to conduct a calm and a thorough discussion on how Japan would be able to contribute to the peace building process and what it is at risk. So of course, the most serious risk is summit failure that eventually leads to military conflict. The second risk is a half-baked agreement. For example, it would be a disaster if the US was satisfied by North Korea only giving up their ICBMs and agreed to remove sanctions without North Korean commitment to remove short and middle-range ballistic missiles. So it would also be a catastrophe if the US left the definition of the nuclearization ambiguous and reduced its security commitment to Japan and South Korea. So it means not only the security threat by North Korea would continue, but it might also dramatically change the balance of power of East Asia. So third and final risk is that the whole process and framework of the nuclearization and unification would be designed only by the US, South Korea, and North Korea. So if this occurs, Japan would be anyway demanded to make financial contributions towards the denuclearization and economic assistance to North Korea. So, but I'm not sure that Japanese public would willingly accept having to pay money but not having any say. So it is not easy for Japanese public to accept the policy change without taking account of Japanese interests because it might affect the security environment in whole region, including Japan. So what should we do to avoid the risk of Japan passing? But I think there is still time for Japan to establish real strategy to get involved in the process and contribute it. And it would be also possible to do it concurrently with the continuing maximum pressure campaign. So one of the ideas which is worth trying for Japan is proposing a multilateral framework, such as fixed party talks, to ensure long-term stability in the region. The Trump administration does not seem to be in favor of multilateralism due to the previous failure and Mr. Trump's personal instinct in favor of sticking to a one-to-one negotiation. So Japan would also make the IAEA, whose head is Japanese, proactively involved, and Japan makes financial contribution to the IAEA and in the area of human resources as well. So Japan and North Korea already have the 2002 Pyongyang joint declaration by Japanese Prime Minister Koizumi and Kim Jong-il, which includes Japan providing economic cooperation as a crucial part of normalization. So the most crucial issue is how to build consensus among the Japanese public to support the process and the Japanese involvement. So first of all, Japan and South Korea have to build a good, healthy relationship. So as you know, there is serious dispute, distrust, and misunderstanding of opinion regarding the past history between Japan and South Korea. So both countries should not exploit history issues for their own political gain. But it is also important for Japan to start serious public discussion about the big picture on how to face new regional order with a unified Korea and how we will be able to take advantage of this development for stability and prosperity of the region. So we should avoid falling into too negative or too positive zero-sum thinking, such as denuclearization is not possible or peace will be achieved very easily. So if Japan is not to be able to engage constructively and is just asked to pay money, there is a huge risk that Japan will lose self-confidence, leading to the spread of the dangerous nationalism. So that is why I have big expectations of Mr. Prime Minister Abe. He is a politician with a lot of influence over the conservative and nationalist base in Japan. So how to manage the nationalism is an important task for leaders in Japan and other Asian countries. Yeah, this is Mike.
Thank you very much. Speaking of the new regional order, we've just had the North-South Korea summit. I know you've watched that very closely, Katie. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the significance of that and some of the other things we've seen, the closing down of the nuclear testing site. Is it exhausted? Is it not? Is that a gesture that we should really take to mean something, or is it a sort of empty one? Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about that. And I should say to the audience that Katie says we can ask her absolutely anything, including Kim Jong-un's shoe size. So if one of you is brave enough to ask that later, be my guest. Katie.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I was actually traveling inside New Zealand from northern to southern island, and I only checked the email at night because Wi-Fi is not very good in New Zealand. There are a lot of sheep and a lot of cows, but not much Wi-Fi. And at hotel, I checked the email, and my most beloved and respected former boss and colleagues and senior mentor, Admiral Blair, sent me an email. We have a Sasakawa meeting and we have a panel on North Korea. Would you say yes? I never say no to him. So that's the reason I'm here, even though I'm on terrible jet lag. And let me put it this way. The euphoria from South Korea, based on the survey, 70% just absolutely respects and adores President Moon. And they think about 60% North Korea's Kim will denuclearize the entire country, getting rid of all the nukes. And from the US mostly, including very smart and actually she did the heavy lifting for me, talked about a lot of important points that skepticism is quite strong. And you watched it, you observed it, you YouTubed it, and so no need to regurgitate what you saw, what you read. My preparation was only for the 5 minutes, but I'll be even shorter. What's new? What's new? Can you tell me? Number one, of course, smile and charm diplomacy from North Korea, right? Now the South Korean youngsters started creating the fan club of Kim Jong-un. Can you imagine? As Sue said, is he changed from like prior to April and post-April? Is he a new man? Do you believe that? It's not happening very frequently unless you have a life-threatening experience. You may be reborn Christian or having a new philosophy, just like our former president, George Bush, actually was the case, but not Kim, in my belief. New official strategy is also new. This is very important. North Korea has pursued, ever since Kim came to the political stage, two-track policy. Military advancement, including WMD achievements, spearheaded by nukes and missile developments, and then economic development, so-called in Korean Byungjin, side by side, we go together. They dumped it. Now they say, we achieved the goals. Now we have one policy, one strategy, that is economic building, economic reconstruction. Fascinating, isn't it? Lastly, so-called new change is that moonshine government. Do you know the meaning of a moonshine? The so-called reconciliation, dialogue, and embracing between two Koreas. Original prototype of the moonshine was sunshine policy. And sunshine policy's successor is Mr. Moon. And Koreans are very good in making the new joke or humorous statement, and it's now called the moonshine policy. I actually love moonshine more than sunshine. But nonetheless, the moonshine policy is now receptive to North Korea's strategy. This is a great new change because before the President Moon, President Park and President Lee were actually very conservative and strong against North Korea. What's not new is actually, you have to pay attention to me. What's not new? North Korea's multiple threats, including nukes, has not changed at all. Nukes, missiles, chemical, bio-conventional, cyber. Nobody talks about cyber because cyber is a kind of strange creature because it's there, but you don't really actually contact. Cyber attacks to South Korea and Japan, you would not believe it. Money is gone from your bank, your entire pouch is gone. Why we don't know much about it? Because bankers, investments, and all these people keep their mouth shut. And so threats are still existing. What's not new? North Korea declared in the third committee meeting of the 7th plenum in April 21st, 6 days before the summit, that we now achieved and we now own the treasured, powerful, precious sword. What is that? We are a nuke country, as Sue indicated. Now, another important point. Kim's security concern. Have you seen the V-shaped 12 guys running next to the Mercedes-Benz? I think that's the most eye-capturing moment of the entity and reality and essence of North Korea. My God, the large guy sitting in a cushion in the Mercedes-Benz, that Benz costs more than $1 million from Germany, special order, right? And 12 guys running. Kim's security control and concern will be paramount. Because of that, in that previous meeting of April 21st, they declared security control, social control will be overall much more strengthened and enhanced. North Korea has not changed. Lastly, this is actually the maybe important point for you to think about, whether nuclear negotiation is the only solution to get rid of all these problems. I will just give you the hints. Last unchanged aspect of North Korea is that erosion of North Korea society continuing. Erosion. That is growth of illegal capitalism and activities, including party elites and military elites, and corruption. Do you think Soviet Union ruined because of Star Talk and because of arms confrontation against the United States, give me a break, was not the case. Social erosion and corruption. Today, with the bribery, you can take out the person who will be guillotined in the gulag. If you have $50,000, you can take him out. So this social erosion is continuing. So I'm just hinting to you to raise some interesting question, what does this mean? That's all.
Thank you. Can I just see a quick show of hands? I'm going to ask some questions myself, but who would like to ask a question when we come to that? Just a quick show of hands. Great, thank you. So you've met North Koreans before, and you've met North Koreans recently, and we obviously detect from you quite a degree of cynicism. What can you tell us about your meetings, your recent meetings with North Koreans, the way they are trying to convince you, and how you are assessing what they're telling you?
No, because actually their behavior is different. There was a sense, so there is something, a change afoot. Now, I'm not saying that's strategy that's fundamentally different, that's going to lead to a complete verifiable, irreversible denuclearization. But first of all, I sense that North Koreans themselves are, the low-level officials, they're not in the loop. They haven't gotten the talking points yet. A lot of it is being decided by Kim Jong-un and the intel shop. Like here too, it was really President Trump and Pompeo and the intelligence area that's been doing the negotiation. So they don't know quite what to make of this new situation, because 6 months ago they would have told me, never, ever, ever, we're never giving up nuclear weapons. This is like, it's in Constitution enshrined. And now they're like, well, what's my talking point? This is very confusing. So I think it's hard to just go by that. I do think Kim Jong-un is very shrewd, very astute, very smart. I think it's better not to underestimate him. And I think he's not going to necessarily come here and blow up this summit. He's not, or not come here, but meet with President Trump. He has an agenda. And when you've seen how he has turned to summitry and diplomacy after last years of provocations, he's doing an amazing job. And look at his, in terms of image makeover, it was 100% success. It was so good. The Olympic outreach, sending the 230 cheerleaders, Kim Yo-jong went, and she was hugely popular in South Korea. Just the way it was all conducted. Look at his meeting with Xi Jinping, with his modern, attractive wife, the North Korean officials looking like a normal leader, having a normal summit. They were drinking $250,000 bottle of Mao Tai, but just having this whole image makeover. I think he's on a path here. So I think what I'm afraid of is that it's easy when North Korea acts badly, right? Because then it's easier for us to unite and have a response. It's harder when North Korea acts in this manner. So I do believe they are going to come to a summit prepared to give up something, or even blow up something, dismantle something, like to show, because they know that they need to give some sort of a visual CNN effect here. So it's going to get, I think, even more complicated and more confusing. And I think it really requires a deft policy, US policy. And we need to decide in advance, what are we looking, what is the ultimate goal here? Are we still going for complete, CIVID, complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization? Or is 60-70% solution good enough? Knowing that probably North Korea is not going to really do it. But is it good enough to just take us to some, because it's still better than where we were just a couple months ago when we were talking about limiting military strike.
I mean, the administration is very aware of those choices. Where do you think they are on it? How much are they exploring the 60% option?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what they have decided. I think maybe they are leaning towards, because I do think President Trump really wants to walk out of this meeting and call it a success. So if there's two parties that are really incentivized to have a successful meeting, they will. Again, part of my earlier point, whether that leads to a long-term success, that remains to be seen.
But you could have a success just on a handshake and a photo, but what you're talking about is actually
I think
saying...
it'll be more than that. I mean, my bet is that it'll be more than that.
60% is a real shift. I mean, do you think that the administration is actually considering privately saying, that's okay, we can make steps, we don't actually need complete, irreversible, verifiable denuclearization?
I'll be the last person to speak for President Trump's what he's thinking.
Let's-
I really am. I truly don't know. Some of his comments does concern me, like when he thought, whether he said it or not, that he thought it would be okay to pull out U.S. troops from South Korea. He has made some comments regarding alliance commitments even before he was elected. So I think it's hard to say what President Trump will ultimately do when he sits down with Kim Jong-un. But what I'm saying is Kim Jong-un will come to the meeting and was prepared to offer up something that would appear to be good. And I think we need to be prepared for that possibility instead of thinking he's just going to come and just. I think I've seen the last couple of months have shown me that this guy is very astute. And by the way, North Koreans have been completely focused on us, the United States. It's 100% policy while we're divided. We're thinking about a million different things, right? So I think we need to be prepared for that possibility. Even a grand bargain or some sort that North could offer. And what will we do in response?
Let's do an easier question then, and let President Trump.
There are no easy questions when it comes to North
Well,
Korea.
let's let him speak in his own words. Yesterday he tweeted, and it's always good to be aware of Mr. Trump's tweets. But this one said, numerous countries are being considered for the meeting, capital letters, but would Peace House, Freedom House on the border of North and South Korea be a more representative, important, and lasting sight than a third country? Just asking! Exclamation mark.
Yeah.
Now, who is he asking? Is he asking the American public? Is he asking Kim? And where are we now on where is the meeting going to be?
Okay, so now my money is on the Panmunjom TMC area.
Right.
I understand that he's been watching TV and that he saw what happened with the Inter-Korea Summit and it looked really good to him. And per his comment, it has symbolism than random country like Singapore. Now, places like Switzerland and Sweden, there is an issue of North Koreans don't have a plane that can reliably fly long distance. They don't have a pilot that has experience of flying the long distance. And think about it, Kim Jong-un never flew, Kim Il-sung never flew, to this degree. So there's actual logistical concerns that is, Kim Jong-un really, does he feel comfortable? It's a face-saving thing to also, or loss of face thing. What I mean is, when you're you can't fly commercial, do you want to fly a borrowed plane? So there is an actual issue with going too long of a distance. So I do think, I understand that it's down to now Singapore, and we are pushing Singapore, or the officials, administration officials are pressing for Singapore because we think that U.S. thinks that we're giving North Korea too much to even do it at DMZ. But I understand that President Trump is leaning towards DMZ, obviously, per his tweet.
And what originally we were told there were 5 locations. So what were those 5? What has been dismissed?
Switzerland, Sweden, Mongolia, Singapore, DMZ, even South Korea, even Vietnam, Hanoi was considered.
Right.
Okay, that was an easier question.
Yeah. Katie, what do you think when in the summit the phrase was let's check exactly, a nuclear-free Korean peninsula? What does it imply that South Korea has to give up, that the US has to give up in terms of the alliance, extended deterrence? What does it mean that they've agreed that as opposed to North Korea's denuclearization?
Do I have to use this? Maybe my microphone was broken. Anyway, I always try to learn something from North Korean specialists. Born in North Korea, lived there, and maybe worked there. And there are a bunch of them, including the former DCM deployed to London, Mr. Tae Yong-ho, who was actually ordered to keep his mouth shut during the peace summit was going on. And there are also a lot of strategic good thinkers out of the 25,000 North Koreans, some of them in Canada, some of them in London, some of them in Copenhagen. And I've been in contact with them, and they all came up and sent me actually a nice document saying that North Korea's so-called in Korean word, 비핵화, no nuclearization or denuclearization, means specific meaning. That is, we are nuclear power, and all nuclear powers will do the same thing, means give up or clean up, and we'll be part of it. So that is the most amazing consensus among these people. And basically, South Koreans, just in such euphoria. By the way, I have to say a little bit about South Korean politics, just 2 seconds. The current South Korea is not unified solidarity country. It is divided by the 2 different ideological groups. I'm talking about the really ideological, philosophical division that is more globalized, speaking English, love the Western civilization, and try to be part of OECD or global culture. The other side is that we are the branch of the great source of Confucian civilization, which is the China. So we are kind of like a part of China. We don't like Japanese. We don't like any English-speaking handsome man or woman trained in overseas. And we don't like Americans. We like North Koreans better because they are my brothers and sisters. Out of these 2 ideological divisions between so-called South and South conflict, the current government is the latter one, the pro-China, pro-North Korea. And maybe they don't say much, but very anti-American and anti-whatever Western civilization and culture. So when they accepted the North Korean denuclearization, they never ask what's the meaning of it. So that's the basically bottom line. North Korea, Kim Jong-un has, as Sue said and everybody said, strategic vision about what to achieve when he meets Trump. Maybe not on the first meeting, but at least his team working as a solidarity for the day and night. And they came up with some itemized points. Number 1, Mr. T and me, do you understand the denuclearization? I hope our president will answer very, very prudently and very nicely. And number 2, when you get rid of all the nukes, possible submarine aircraft from Guam or Japan, Okinawa, whatever, or all strategic assets flying to Korea, if you get rid of them, yes, we'll be very happy to be going in tandem with you. And will you guarantee our peaceful existence forever? Not under by Lee or Park or Mr. Smith, but Mr. Kim. And guarantee the survival and longevity of North Korean regime. And if you like it, please get out of Korea. That's the North Korea's long-term plan, as Sue indicated. So very unfortunately, I sound to be a very bad woman who is a representative of skepticism, but this is not an ideology. This is based on how much you know, how much you are really realistic pragmatism.
How big a deal is the future of the 28,500 US troops? Because we've already seen a little bit of disagreement played out in public among South Korean very senior officials about whether it immediately implies them staying or going. Is this going to be a key part of the debate in future months, and do they stay or go?
Well, as Sue and everybody said, Kim is well-trained. You know, nobody can rule country more close to 7 decades without much trouble. The Kim. The DNA, he got good DNA. He got a lot of good training. So basically, it's really sitting there with his strengths. And what was the question? I forgot.
28, the US troops.
I am on jet lag moment right now. So now the U.S.-Korea relationship, I've been working for RAND Corporation and Institute for Defense Analysis. My middle name is Defense, you know. I'm not a nitty-gritty military expert, but I do know a lot about alliance. And one time for the Admiral Blair, I did the U.S. alliance re-examination task with the prominent scholars in DC. At that time, even though it was about several years ago, basically our conclusion is that it's like a long marriage life. Romance is out, children are all grown up, the old man, old woman, and I mean, there is no sparkle, just a marriage of convenience. And I put it this way because of there is a lot of sour skepticism toward Americans, and Americans are also bitterly frustrated with the Koreans too. I'll give you one very sad example. When the missiles were developing, and South Koreans nervous about it, and Japan very wisely joined the missile defense program with the US. South Korea, no, we are okay. But then when the missile testing continues, they finally decide to allow America to deploy the THAAD system, high altitude special system that has a battery power that can even look at into Chinese territory. And through so much controversy, the THAAD is now deployed. And there are about 250 American military specialists are guarding and basically working around the THAAD in a town called Seongju, very famous for sweet melon. So all those sweet melon guys were protesting. And they are the house prisoner because of anti-Americanism and demonstrations against the Americans there, and THAAD are so fierce. They've been eating the rationed food in a can as if they are deployed in the Kandahar or Afghanistan or Taliban fighting places. This is ally, right?
So let me throw this
basically
idea.
28,000 is at the kind of a moment of either staying or going away, honestly.
So let me throw this idea of the loveless marriage and the 28,500 troops that are, I don't know if that's the wedding ring, but
Yeah, I'll answer
what's
that.
going to happen to
But
them?
by the way, Admiral Blair and Mrs. Blair have a lot of sparks, so I wouldn't say all long-term marriages. 28,500 American soldiers, I don't think Kim Jong-un will ask for that right away. Again, I actually think he's going to be very, very savvy about this. He knows that this is a sensitive topic. This is not what he's going to bring up. He's going to talk about normalization of relations in return for denuclearization. All sounds good. You set it up. These things will come up later because when you have normalization, your peace treaty, this stuff comes up naturally because the rationale behind it, you will eventually erode, even if it's not right away. So even if I were him, I would say, oh, no, I'm not talking about troops leaving. I'm talking about normalizing relations with the United States. I do think we need to give him a little bit more credit that he's just not going to come in and act totally idiotic.
What are the steps that North and South take in the process of this extraordinary prospect of reconciliation, reintegration, of becoming one country again? Is that really what is on the cards, and how long does that take?
If the current Moon government continues to retain the power and Kim Jong-un behaves politely, charmingly with a lot of smile, and our president messing up the situation, only holding the nuclear card, the Koreans will be much more toward the Korean solidarity. And among us, between you and me, let's resolve and try to follow the steps that was prepared by this current Korean government for the long-term implication. Means that I wanted to retire, but I think North Korea saga will continue. So basically, you will see a lot of drama evolving in Seoul, Pyongyang, and Washington, D.C.
I'm going to open it up to the floor in just one moment. I want to ask a very big regional question. If any of this proceeds, what is the implication for the idea that there would be a united Korean bloc that is allied to the US, and where would that leave China, and what would Japan make of that?
Yeah. Actually, I think the United Korea, United Peninsula, Korean Peninsula, and if there will be a very healthy democratic nation will be built, that's okay for Japan, I think. But I am a bit concerned about the Japanese public opinion that the nationalist side still hold the anti-Korea feeling, emotion, but also in liberal side, people are a little bit worrying about their strong nationalism in Korean side, because in Japan there are a feeling that we also have the history that nationalism destroyed the countries in the middle of the 20th centuries. So if you have the new United Korea, but still having the trouble with Japan, that could be a little bit it will be making the Japanese Republic a little bit nervous on that. Also, the question is about China. In the long term, for Japanese public, the concern is the rise of China. So what the direction of the United Korea is going to take the policies towards China? So probably people will be demanding themselves about that question.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. I think there's a microphone running around somewhere. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Si Yang, reporter from Voice America. I have a question for Dr. Terry. You just mentioned that both Kim and President Trump have the incentive to claim the summit claim the summit successful. So I'm just wondering, could you elaborate on that? What this successful summit will be like, and do you see any risk of that? Thank you.
Well, as long as it doesn't blow up, that President Trump says, if this doesn't go well, it's going to be a very brief meeting and I'm going to walk out. If he doesn't do that, and they have 2 days meeting and they're going to have some sort of joint statement, so very minimal, some grand statement about North Korea is going to pursue denuclearization and for normalization. I mean, all sounds great. What about the details? How do we get that? Well, that will come later. For now, we have agreed to have this kind of joint declaration. It's not so different from the Inter-Korea Summit declaration, right? That's all sounds great. It's all in the details that has to be worked out. So initially, that's why I say initially, they can both turn it around and say, look, we were able to meet each other and agree on some general principles, and it's successful. This is certainly more than what my predecessor was able to accomplish, right? It's the first sitting US president that's going to meet with a North Korean leader.
Yeah, gentleman, second row.
Peter Humphrey, I'm an intelligence analyst and a former diplomat. I note that as long as there are submarines cruising the exclusive economic zone of the peninsula will never be denuclearized. There is, of course, a weapon of mass destruction far more destructive than biological, chemical, or nuclear, and that is the prison camps. The very prison camps where all nuclear technology can be moved without fear of inspection. If we're not leading this charge against the most lethal weapon in Korea, what's the point? Is our mentor Neville Chamberlain? I mean, what's going on here?
Human rights, prison camp. There was a statement.
All right. I think you already mentioned a very important point. What's the point? And a lot of things we are actually missing. As I said, what's new, what's not new, I didn't elaborate very much, but basically North Korea is the same as before, other than diplomacy and then small diplomacy and the human rights issue. There is North Korea is to the 21st century today's little, not exactly Nazi period of Europe, but they have prisoners about, we never know. And then Pyongyang is the different republic, and the other parts of North Koreans are having really the same miserable life. And so all this nuke. Nobody is asking any serious question to me, but I said social erosion, corruption, illegal activities are creating the foundation of maybe fundamental changes. I've been arguing for the last 30 years. Information and truth will make them free, but nobody listens.
The gentleman in the hat. Yeah.
Steve Winters, independent consultant. I direct this question to Sumi, or perhaps I should say Dr. Su. I'm trying to get some insight into the thinking of the North Korean analytic people. I've heard so many times this statement, oh, we're familiar with the Kim family playbook. Didn't all this happen back in the 90s? Weren't these agreements made? Fair enough. But it would seem to me that, are there anybody in that community who's thinking, wait a minute, this is not 1992. I mean, China is 25 years ahead of where they were back then. So many things have changed. I mean, I can easily see an argument in the community saying, look, Kim is a young guy. I mean, he's aware of what's going on in the world. You know, he sees a certain world leader saying the first country that masters AI is going to take over the world. And he's thinking, why am I going to be sitting here on a pile of nukes, which are totally useless while all this stuff is going on? Therefore, I mean, is there anybody thinking along these lines?
No, there's active debate. The playbook is very simple. I mean, it's North Koreans have learned a lesson. I mean, that's even for Kim Jong-un. It pays to provoke, but it pays even more to placate afterwards. But there is a debate. But even if Kim Jong-un is a transformational guy and said, you know what, we're tired of North Korea being the 198th ranked economy in the world. I want to bring North Korea to a modern world. And he seems to be different from his father. He seems to like modern things, all the modern trappings. I mean, so we see that the problem is, as he pursues this path, he's going to run into the same challenges that his father has faced. What are we going to do about human rights? What are we going to do about information getting into North Korea? I mean, so the danger for the North Korean regime is as they open up or something moves on with the United States, it's going to come like a tsunami. So maybe it's not right away, but eventually we'll be like, what about human rights? What about political prison camps? What about this? So is he this kind of transformational leader that's going to be able to really take North Korea? And that means he might have to give up dynastic succession for North Korea. Is he that guy? Nobody knows, but you know, we can make a guess.
Gentleman in the corner.
Yeah.
I think there's a microphone just winging its way to you.
I'm David Loudon. I'm a policy analyst. My mind tends to work in abstracts, and the comment about the prisoner camps and so forth kind of ties into my question, which is threat vectors, sometimes they can be hidden under the surface. So in my mind, I'm thinking about, is there a present or a ongoing or a likely potential for North Korea to develop atolls like China has done, and then to weaponize those atolls, which could be used as an offshore of the peninsula to either exert influence, disrupt trade, etc. And I would be interested in your thoughts on that, please.
Do you have a sense of that?
What's
The question was, if I understand correctly, might North Korea develop and weaponize atolls in the same way that...
Weaponize what?
Atolls. So in the same way that the South China Sea has been built up and then turned into military bases. Is that a prospect? You think North Korea has enough?
Yeah, I don't think that's a high priority.
But one thing that South Korea, North Korea agreed, I mean, there are Panmunjom declaration, but there is unspoken parts which we don't have a full text, is that the West Coast, where there were neighbor skirmishes happened, there are a lot of Yeodo, Pyeongnyangdo, small islands, just like already existing natural atoll, are there. And now it's included, basically water, air, ground, all the confrontational manners and the behaviors should change. So that could be an interesting deploy of an outpost, but not like China style, because North Korea's Kim has to focus inward to make ever angry elites and people to be satisfied with economic development.
Thank you so much, everyone. We are out of time, but Wataru, Katie, and Sue, thank you so much for being on this panel. It would be good to speak again after the summit.
Yes.
She wants to use that mic.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will be taking a 10 minutes break, please. We'll be resuming at 10:45. Thank you. I think this works.
Okay.
I can just use this one. I think it's fine. We're 5 minutes behind, but it's not too fine.
Yeah, she left.
Thank you so much. Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. Yes. I'm Siguri. Yes. Hi. Yes, absolutely. It was great. It's really great. Thank you so much. You always do a terrific job. So thank you. Yeah, and it was a good panel too. The panelists were great. Yeah, very lively. Sue was really lively. Okay, I'll go. Thank you. Oh, hi, Elaine, right? I'm Siri. Hi, nice to meet you. Maybe at some. Yes, it makes sense. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will resume the session momentarily. Please take your seats. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We'll be starting momentarily. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Is my mic on? Yep. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for the Trilateral Cooperation segment of today's program. I'm Dave Scheer, former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asia-Pacific Security Affairs, former Ambassador to Vietnam and lifelong Northeast Asia hand, I think. With us are Admiral Dennis Blair, former Pacific Commander and now Chairman and Distinguished Senior Fellow at SPF USA, Lieutenant General In Bum Chun, retired from the ROK Army in 2016 after a distinguished military career, and Mr. Tsuneo Watanabe, who is with the Sasakawa Peace Foundation in Tokyo and a popular commentator on foreign policy in Japan. Thank you for joining us, everybody. Something tells me that trilateral cooperation is not going to melt away just because peace is breaking out on the Korean Peninsula. We're going to need it when, or maybe if, the peace breaks down. And we convened the trilateral exercise during the first week of the Pyeongchang Olympic Games because all of us believe that it's quite possible that the peace may someday break down, however unlikely that may be. And that we will need to continue and build on our trilateral cooperation if we are going to face the prospect of another cycle of tension after this apparent cycle of relaxation on the Korean Peninsula. So I'd like to ask our speakers to, I'm going to turn to our speakers, and I'd like to ask them to speak for about 7 to 10 minutes. And I'll start with Admiral Blair, who will give us a summary of the exercise.
Well, thanks, Ambassador Scheer. And I think Sue Terry said in the last panel that it's easier to deal with North Korea when it's acting badly than when it's acting well. Well, in our tabletop exercise, in which we brought former retired Japanese, American, and Republic of Korea officials and officers together, we had North Korea acting badly, and we will tell you what happened, because even when we're dealing with North Korean provocations, the importance of trilateral cooperation is high, and it's not that simple. So let me quickly, just to bring everybody up to speed, tell you what happened in this tabletop exercise, which we conducted in February of this year. So if you could bring up the first slide, please, or is it up there? Oh, there we go. And the first set of conditions we had are shown on this slide. We created a situation in which there was a crisis that had to be addressed by all three countries, the United States, the Japan, and the Republic of Korea, because all of them had forces that were within range of this set of refugee boats that was coming across the East Sea, the Sea of Japan, headed for Japan, and the the three countries had to decide what to do about it. And here's what they did. Each independently agreed to make sure that the refugees made it safely, that they were not harmed by North Korean ships and airplanes that were chasing them, and they reinforced their forces. North Korea brought its forces out. They had orders to recapture the refugees, but when they saw the large number of ships and aircrafts that the United States, Korea, and Japan had brought, they stood off and waited for further orders. They received those further orders, which was to make an attack and then retire. The three countries agreed that those forces still posed a threat, and it turned out that American forces were in the best position to deal with them, and in the game, the Korean frigates were sunk and the airplanes were shot down. The second, this was an example of an incident that sort of came up as a surprise to everyone, and see how the countries dealt with it. The next day was a set of deliberate North Korean provocations to achieve political ends. And it started, as shown here. The North Korea began with these political demands and decided to take a number of provocative actions in order to reinforce them. North Korea made Chonan-style attacks on a Japan Coast Guard ship, a Republic of Korea frigate. When North Korea did not get results in that first attack, they decided that they needed to up their game to make further demands, as shown here on this slide. And they didn't have any more luck with gaining political concessions than they had earlier. They then decided to take another step in provocation, which the North Korean team still judged would be below the level of starting a war, but would cause enough concern in Japan, Republic of Korea, and the United States to gain the concessions they sought. And they fired missile volleys at American bases in the Republic of Korea and in Japan, with the results that are shown on this slide. The missile attacks killed both military and civilian personnel in Korea, in South Korea, and in the United States. The reaction of the three allies consulting together was strong, as shown here. They made a combined attack, Korean forces attacking, United States forces attacking, and interestingly, Japan self-defense forces accompanying the American ships and planes as they made their attacks, although Japan did not have the capability or the authority to actually participate in missile and bomb attacks. They were part of the American formations that did so. The final move of our game was North Korea using its nuclear capability. It fired a nuclear missile at the island of Okotashima, which is actually in the Philippine Sea, uninhabited, and renewed its political demands. We ended the game at that point, but none of the three national teams, the American team, the Japanese team, or the Korean team, was interested in making political concessions at that point. There was a robust discussion of what sort of reaction should be made against North Korea for this egregious use of its nuclear forces. So tabletop exercises are not really set up to try to predict the future. They're not set up to give exact answers. They're set up to stimulate thinking about the kind of hard situations that come in the future, and what you learn from them is the real understandings of how reactions in those kinds of situations would be helpful and would not be helpful. Here's what we learned from the American team's point of view. The first thing was that the relationship among the United States, Japan, and the Republic of Korea is really different now in 2018 from what it had been in previous years. When I was Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Command back in 2000, the relationship, the way the crises would be handled would be the United States would decide what it wanted to do, and then we would convince the Koreans and the Japanese that they should support us. This game showed a very much more equal consultation among the three countries, both at the political level and in the military level. It was really a palpable difference, the way the game players consulted among themselves in order to decide on a unified response from what we'd been involved in years before. A second insight was that the communications that had been set up by the American alliance system in the past, which basically was one chain of communication going through the Pacific Command to Japan, another communication system that went through the Combined Forces Command in Korea, and these chains of commands becoming more and more separate as the level of hostility increased, were not going to work, and there had to be very rapid and continuous three-way trilateral communication among all three countries, both at the political and at the military level. And the players in this game, very experienced, recently retired officers and officials, did that very well. And then I guess the third lesson we learned is that if the United States, Japan, and Korea stay coordinated in responding to North Korean provocative behavior, North Korea doesn't win. My job in the game was the director of the control team, and I was really trying to cause splits in the alliance, to cause fissures where North Korea could make advantages, get political concessions from one country, play it off against another country. And to my frustration as the game director, the three country teams stayed together very, very tightly. And as you saw at the tactical level, North Korea lost. Their ships were sunk. There were no they lost at the political level. No concessions were made to them. And the alliances were as strong at the end of this exercise as they had been in the beginning. So I think a final strong lesson is that trilateral coordination and cooperation leads to being able to handle these sorts of contingencies very well. Let me stop there, David.
Thank you, Admiral Blair. I remember as a much more junior officer in 1993, as the political military unit chief on the Japan desk, participating in a tabletop exercise with the Japanese on what their role might be in a Korean contingency, particularly a NEO, and it was a revelation. And we have been, it was great at helping us define the questions we faced, and we've been trying to answer those questions ever since. And hopefully this kind of tabletop exercise done trilaterally will form an excellent basis for our Track 1 partners to move forward on trilateral cooperation. With that in mind, I'd like to turn to Lieutenant General Chun to give us a Korean perspective. I know that there were some sensitivities with regard to ROK participation in this exercise. We're glad you were able to overcome them, and we were delighted to have you in the exercise.
Thank you.
Please.
So the first thing that I want to mention is I want to just continue the fact that Professor Oh had mentioned that Korea is a vibrant democracy now. So we have a lot of opinions. And that was well replicated during this TTX. We had former military from all services and former very high-level civilian leadership who had participated. There were conservatives, moderates, and romantics. That's how I categorize them. So I just want to point out that Sasakawa USA did a great job in getting us together, although some of us did not know what we were getting into. Secondly, about the scenario. To those in my team who did not understand that a TTX is basically a game that generates thought and ideas, they were really uncomfortable with the scenario. And these are the reasons why. Number one, as Koreans, of course, we did not want to see missiles flying over our heads and bombs exploding. So they were very uncomfortable with the what they termed aggressive nature of the scenario. Secondly, the team, some of our team members were concerned that it was just before the Olympics. We were trying to form a peace mood on the Korean Peninsula, and yet, a couple of 100 miles away, we're talking about a full-scale, crisis brewing, and so they were uncomfortable about that as well. But the third reason, which I find positive, is that Admiral Blair made sure that we did not know what the scenario was. And being Asians, we were very uncomfortable at the fact that we did not know what the hell, what was coming, what was coming up next. So this fog of situation, vice fog of war, caused the Korea team, and I think I saw the same thing in the Japanese team, to scurry out and say, what's the other guy doing? And this generated cooperation, which is exactly what we needed. And sir, my hat's off to you for making that happen. So those were the main reasons that it was an uncomfortable situation for some of the Koreans, not me, but I think it contributed to the overall realism and to the purpose of the TTX. During the 2.5 days, which was very dynamic, some trends occurred within the Korean team. The first trend was that the Korea team was swift and strong against all North Korean military provocations. And I think some in the group found that to be surprising, because they had expected, well, the Koreans would be a little bit reluctant to be strong against the North Koreans. But the team, I can assure you, was quite united in the fact that no matter what ideology you had, if the North Koreans were going to use force, force is what the North Koreans understood, and we would do that. Secondly, although the team also tried their best to make sure that it did not de-escalate. And I think all of you can understand that's where we live, where our families live, where our dogs live, and that's why we wanted to make sure that the situation was managed. Third trend was that as the scenario progressed, we understood that we needed cooperation. It was going to be in our best interest to talk to our neighbors. And here's where we, again, were able to realize the role of the United States in the region. And it came from very fundamental reasons. If we wanted to call the Japanese, I'm exaggerating a little, we need the Americans to make the call for us. And I think it emphasized the importance of the role of the United States in the region. So my conclusions, or our team's conclusions during the TTX, is number one, cooperation between the three countries is important, and it is unavoidable. Number two, but realistically, we have a lot of challenges, and even innocent surveys, like the survey that was mentioned in the first session, like 50% of the Japanese people are very cautious about the summit between the North and South. Well, people in South Korea think that 50% of the Japanese people don't want unification, which is not what that survey meant, but can be misunderstood as to this, and some Koreans will use it as such. So there's a lot of challenges there. And because of these challenges, I think it emphasized to us that 1.5 activities like what Sasakawa USA is doing is so important, because we just can't do the 1.0 part. So I think that was the second lesson. Third lesson is We still have a long way to go. This is the first step. I think the first step was great, sir, and I hope other organizations will try to do things like this so that we can get people, especially the Koreans and the Japanese, together to talk about peace and further cooperation in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General Chun. One thing I was impressed by, this was the first TTX I had participated in since we adopted the new U.S. Japan Defense Guidelines in 2015. And I was surprised and delighted by the extent to which the Japanese had formed an interpretation of the guidelines that could be applied at the operational level very quickly and very effectively. So I was very happy with the extent to which the Japanese stepped up and supported both the U.S. and our ROK allies. And with that in mind, I'll turn to Mr. Watanabe.
Thank you very much. I'm a researcher of Sasakawa Peace Foundation in Tokyo, so I was very happy to join TTX as a facilitator of a Japan side. And I think the one very important lesson we've learned is that now Japan can do more than before. After the Ambassador Shio explained that Japan had a new guideline for the U.S.-Japan security cooperation. But that was possible after Japan's big change of interpretation of Article 9 of the Constitution and also security legislation in 2015. Actually, I was the public testimony guy who explained how important to have such the new legislation. And at that time, that legislation was not so popular, so surrounded by the many demonstrators, and I testified, oh, this law is very good for the securing Japan and surrounding Japan and the Asia-Pacific region too. And well, I think that was really important for the Korean contingency in case. And that was really the good test for at least several Japanese participants actually experienced the military level and civilian government level played with a new capacity of Japan. But still the many lessons, I think. First of all, since Japan can do more legally and practically, but that's not shared with even the United States, and it's not so well shared with ROK. So the lesson learned is, I think, clearly the same conclusion with the General Chan. More communication and more information sharing is crucial. And I think that is a really case. And in the case of contingency, as Admiral Blair explained, so many things are happening. And very first level of contingency, that was not wartime, that was not serious case, but still we saw the big trouble. That case, Japan side was very puzzled with which counterpart we should ally. We should ask the information. And our alliance coordination between the Japanese military, Japanese self-defense forces, and the U.S. force in Japan was excellent, good communication. However, you should realize how complicated the command of the United States in case of Korean contingency. I think eventually U.S. had a combined command with South Korean and the U.S. military. But I think basically two theater in East Asia. One is a Korean theater of operation, and the other one is a Japan theater of operation. And the command is basically by the Pacific Command. However, what U.S. forces in Japan can tell to the Japanese counterpart is very limited because didn't share fully with U.S. forces in Korea. And despite of GSOMIA, that's the General Security of a Military Information Agreement between Japan and the Republic of Korea, but that practice was not seriously tested and prepared. So Japan, as the Japan team in the contingency from time to time and changing, so frustrated to we don't get the direct information from the counterpart of a South Korean, and also even U.S. forces in Korea. So such a dilemma was solved by the Trilateral 2+2. That was not existed in now. But I asked the Korean part, let's set up the meeting with 2+2. Plus 2+2 means defense ministry level and foreign ministry level plus military head. And between Japan and the United States, that was smooth and already set up. And between South Korea and the US, already set up. But trilateral level over 2+2 with a military head was not formalized at this moment. However, we really need it, and we asked. I'm sure that at the time the US side was easy. Okay, let's set that. But Korean side had a huge pressure. But throughout the experience, the Korean side was very helpful. However, I remember Korean side, some spokesperson said, we are prisoner of public opinion. Big challenge in serious case, how Korean government can cooperate with Japan. So I think that is a big lesson. Why don't we formalize now, peacetime? If in the contingency, it's getting more difficult and more political challenge. So that was a big lesson we've learned. But again, 2+2 plus, I would say 2+2+2, trilateral coordination, big help for the setting up, the sharing information and sharing strategy and tactics, and also sometimes very good to the creating the trust each other. That is a big achievement in the TTX, but that's not realized in this world yet. So again, I'd like to say some negative feeling against feeling to the Korean government among Japanese people. We call it Korea fatigue. Korea fatigue means the Japan and the South Korean government agreed on history issues such as comfort of women compensation. However, South Korean government changed the position after we made the agreement. So Korean says they are the prisoner of public opinion. So Japanese too. Japanese political leader is a prisoner of public opinion. So some negative things happens during a contingency. That's very difficult for Japan and the United States and South Korea to coordinate and conduct the appropriate action. I think even in the peacetime too, but more serious in the contingency time. That's the lesson I've learned. So again, at that time, the TTX was conducted with during Winter Olympic. You may remember the very good, beautiful scene. Japanese speed skater Kodaira won gold medal. Unfortunately, her friend and rival, Ms. Lee Sang-hwa, got a silver medal. And she cried. And Kodaira held her. And that was a beautiful story, but such a beautiful story was not made without communication. Ms. Kim and Ms. Kodaira keep communicating, keep actually the fighting, competing in the World Cup. And they created a very deep friendship. I think that's very good lesson. Why don't we create now? I think that's my thought.
Thank you very much, and thanks again to Admiral Blair and Jim Zumwalt and their team for setting up such a great TTX. It ran very smoothly. I'm going to ask a few questions based on 3 of the recommendations in the report, but before I do that, I'd just like to see how many people propose to ask questions at the end of the session.
It's before lunch.
Okay, it's before lunch. Okay. Recommendation 1 in the report is to develop a high-level 2+2+2 trilateral coordination mechanism. I'm wondering on what you would base this mechanism, Admiral Blair.
I think a weakness right now of the trilateral communications among the 3 countries is that they are between counterparts and they're asynchronous. So the foreign ministers will meet, or sometimes at a trilateral level, more often at a bilateral level, and then maybe 3 or 4 months later, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs will meet, and either bilaterally or trilaterally. And progress is made in those meetings, but the kind of forcing function of getting the diplomatic, policy, military, and security levels all together in one room and deciding how we're going to do it on the basis of the shared interests of all 3 countries is something that we need. The multilateral alliances like NATO have these established procedures, and although national interests come to play and sometimes there are tensions, at least there's this rhythm of getting the important questions considered and addressed and hopefully solved on a regular level. So I would like to see the 3 countries get together and say we need to establish this mechanism to meet in peacetime and to be ready to consult quickly in contingencies. And I think the best model that I know about is the one that's been developed between the United States and Japan as a result of the last set of defense guidelines, which was the Alliance Coordination Mechanism, ACM. It's a secure video teleconference capability that goes back and forth right now between Washington and Tokyo, and it's flexible. It can have meetings at all levels. It can have multiple State Department, Defense Department, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Defense meeting, and it's quite effective in handling these problems. And I think if something like that can be extended or developed separately for Korea, the United States, and Japan to develop habits of trilateral cooperation at the same time when issues are important, we can build that into the sort of cabinet level meetings that we had in this game at in the trilateral level.
I think this TTX proves that level of coordination is very important. And it was interesting to watch during the exercise itself how naturally and how quickly it evolved. It got going very quickly, and it worked very effectively. General Chun, now that peace has broken out on the Korean Peninsula, do you see any appetite on the ROK side for actually moving forward to a 2+2+2 or to a formal coordination mechanism?
I think it's hard to say right now, but I think if the Koreans are smart enough, and I think they are, it's in our best interest to talk to our neighbors. And I think we've seen that already because right after the North-South Summit, phone calls were made to President Trump and Prime Minister Abe. And and President Moon is, I think, visiting Japan next week. And this is the first time that a Korean president has visited Tokyo in like 4.5 years, which is really surprising. So I think these are indicators that we will see that kind of 2+2+2, but that will only happen if we work at it. It's not just going to happen. I think that the Koreans will have to be. We need an atmosphere, an environment where the Koreans realize that it is in our best interest to overcome our emotions and have these kind of efforts.
Mr. Watanabe, do you see any political constraints on the Japanese side to including senior level Japanese military officers in this kind of format?
I think I don't think the serious limitation of for the going formal 2+2+2 trilateral. I think, well, the one thing Japan really need to consider is, I forgot to mention, NEO, non-combatant evacuation operation. That is a serious concern of Japan, always. And during the exercise, it's very difficult for Japan, Japan consultant with a Korean counterpart for the preparation for the NEO. So I think that is a very good reason. I think for the Japanese side government to persuade even a skeptical public, we need to do this for this one. So I don't see any serious obstacle.
Thank you very much. The second recommendation in the report is to incorporate Japan's capabilities more fully into deterring and defending against North Korean provocations. In the first scenario, the first day scenario, I had to remind myself that Japan and the ROK do not have a security treaty. Their cooperation appeared to move forward so effectively, but they don't. They have no defense obligations to each other. And in that regard, I'm wondering, in the first day scenario, if US forces had not been present in that part of the Japan Sea where the refugee boat was, but there were just ROK and Japanese forces, would it have played out in the same way? Mr. Watanabe.
Yeah, that's actually the serious trouble. With the US, somehow we share the information or we could coordinate even the operation. If not, that's going to be big disaster or risk to deal with North Korean ship by Japanese self-defense forces and the Korean military. That's big risk.
In other words, there could have been no US forces present, but as long as the US was in there communicating with everybody, it could have worked.
Yeah, I think if I imagine if a US role was not completely lost, wow, that's really big situation is getting much worse than the reality. I think that's very crucial.
General Chung?
So I'm not a naval officer, but humanitarian operations and search and rescue operations are routinely conducted between the Republic of Korea and the Japanese Self-Defense Force. So in this scenario, and when I refer to this scenario, we had North Korean refugees trying to escape North Korea. They were being pursued by North Korean warships. Korean, Japanese, and US warships were in the vicinity, and that was the situation. So if you take out the American ships in that scenario, I think the Koreans and the Japanese would have been smart enough to figure out not to kill each other. And this is a serious problem because when you're at sea, missiles usually have a tendency of hitting things, but not always the right target. So I think the Koreans and the Japanese would have been smart enough to communicate that kind of information and that they would have been able to successfully rescue them. The real question is, what would have been the orders to the ships? So the technical side, I think there's no problem. The communications, the guys and gals would be smart enough to figure it out. But what would have the Korean government and the Japanese government told the crewmen to do? And I think that's where the real national level cooperation would have been required.
One more question on this recommendation. On the U.S.-Japan bilateral side, we've not only established an alliance coordination mechanism, but we've established a bilateral planning mechanism. And I'm wondering if it would be useful or possible for us to establish a trilateral planning mechanism to go with a trilateral coordination mechanism. Admiral?
I think it would be possible to do. I think initially it would have to be appended to the meetings that now take place. So when the ministers of defense meet, spend a couple of hours on bilateral planning. And if you put that on the agenda, then the trustee staffs will work on it ahead of time, and you can make a lot of progress. And I think that would be the path then towards establishing a formal, scheduled ahead of time, routine trilateral planning session. I think this kind of behavior is more active, is more natural for military organizations than it is for political organizations. As General Chun said, there was a sort of cognitive dissonance in conducting a tabletop exercise with a very hostile crisis scenario. At the same time, back in our hotel rooms, there were the combined North and South Korean hockey team was losing every game, and the 130-odd cheerleaders were doing their little dances. But military organizations are used to that. You work on things that you hope don't happen, and the better you are at them, the less likely they are to happen. But if they happen, you're going to lose fewer lives and be successful. I think it is harder to push that through a political process the first time. And so right now we're going to get through this frenzy of summitry. I don't think it's going to be any more successful than you heard from the panel early this morning. But hopefully after that, that can generate momentum for trilateral cooperation in the full number of areas. I mean, you've served in both Southeast Asia and in Northeast Asia, Ambassador Scheer, and the contact levels are so much more frequent, more routine. It's not a big deal to schedule a meeting. People go back and forth in countries. And in Northeast Asia, it's sort of a major policy decision whether you are actually going to attend a meeting, much less work out an agenda. We need to get that more natural rhythm of trilateral coordination rather than making each individual meeting subject to a big political decision. Where do we meet? Who has to travel? Is the time just right? Whose face is saved? We've got to get beyond that.
Well, I agree, and I think though we've made a start, I agree with both General Chun and Mr. Watanabe that we've got a long way to go, and hopefully we can continue it after the series of summits. One more recommendation before I turn to the audience, and that is it is recommended that we develop a more effective approach to non-combatant evacuation operations. And we've been thinking about this since the 1990s, and it still looks like we've got a long way to go. But the report suggests that we think about planning for a staged evacuation down the Korean Peninsula as the crisis develops. General Chun, I'm wondering how you think that might help decision-making on this on the ROK side.
I'm not sure whether it's going to help the decision-making, but it will sure be a catalyst for decisions to be made. As you can imagine, a non-combatant evacuation would be catastrophic for Korean stability. We're not just talking about a couple of 100,000 Americans and Japanese. We're talking about another couple of 100,000 Europeans, other countrymen, and approximately 1 million Chinese trying to leave the country. So naturally, it is a great challenge for the Korean government. Having said that, I am sure that the Korean government will provide the assembly areas, the transportation, the legal basis, and security protection for these kind of operations to occur. But we're talking about millions of people, and it's going to be very difficult. I also think that another thing that we need to think about is the message that we're going to be sending North Korea. They're going to think that an attack is imminent. And when you are in a situation like that, there's only two options, either surrender or attack first. So I think that's another thing that we need to think about. So This is a very complex issue, and this is where I think real open and honest discussion is required. And during this TTX, the scenario which was provided by Sasakawa USA touched upon an issue that can be a springboard for further cooperation. And I think that was very good.
Thank you very much. Let's turn to the audience now. Yes. Sir. Okay.
Is this working? Okay. Hi, my name is Chris Martin. I'm in the U.S. Army. I've had the great opportunity to serve in both South Korea and Japan over my career. Just thinking about the trilateral cooperation, we've actually been doing a lot of trilateral VTCs or teleconferences for some years in North Korean crisis situations at high levels. But to make it more regular and give it a framework, why not use a United Nations command as a structure to do that on? It would perhaps dilute it. We'd be inviting other parties, but it would also make it probably less sensitive and provide a framework for even for planning. Just a suggestion, and maybe your thoughts on that.
Well, as you know from having served there are UN command members and there are UN command members. They're the so-called contributing members who actually sent troops. There's the ones who put flags in the headquarters. And then you have to think about what countries will really be important if a current contingency occurs. And I think it's worth pursuing whether that UNC structure can be turned into a sort of a regular consultation. But I think my thinking is that that perhaps is a construct of the past, and the construct of the future should be the countries that are in the region with interests under threat that have capability to bring to bear, which are the three countries that were in this TTX, would be need to work out new structures for working together. So I think I would be more in favor of trying to build this trilateral communication on that basis rather than trying to resurrect some sort of UN structure.
Another question? Yes.
Mike Macetic, PBS Online NewsHour. The comments about the non-combatant evacuation just brought back to mind, I've heard other discussions about this. Isn't there a fundamental lack of reality? The idea that the South Koreans would sit there and wave Anyang, Anyang as millions of foreigners, hundreds of thousands of foreigners are leaving? I mean, isn't the real chaos going to be with the people remaining behind or threatened to remain behind as their country's about ready to get hit seriously or blown up?
General Chun?
Yes. There's a question over there.
I could just add one thing. It would be the largest non-combatant evacuation operation ever done. I mean, the ones that everybody has experience with are relatively small numbers of people in African countries or places like that. I think this would be. It would have all the worst features of a major war in which people are trapped in countries that are at war, underneath an artillery barrage with trying to get organized. So I think the smart foreigners who are living in Korea make sure that they have their water and their food and their basements dug and are not counting on a first-class ticket within 2 hours of non-combatant evacuation being declared to take them out. So yes, it would be a chaotic, difficult situation in which, and I completely agree with General Chun that government in Korea recognizes its responsibilities to remove non-combatants, even while it is organizing to defend its own country, and it'll do the best it can. But when you look at the transportation infrastructure, the distances involved, it'll be a difficult, chaotic situation.
Let me add. Japan's case is maybe 40,000 or 50,000 Japanese living in Korea, South Korea. And if in case of the evacuation, the big issue is whether South Korean government would allow Japanese self-defense forces playing alive in territory of South Korea. It's a history issue. And it's very difficult. I think during TTX, some discussion with the Korean side, and some suggested maybe only third countries chartered flight would be allowed. Well, sensitive issue. So that's really bad for the preparation issue. Japan cannot prepare with the South Korean government. And that's not only NEO, but also Japan's logistic support to the military operation of U.S. and Korean force. I think that's really difficult.
Thank you. Chris.
Thanks so much. Great discussion. TTX sounds really fascinating. Right at the end of the North Korea per se discussion, a good question was asked about China, but they never quite got around to answering it. And this discussion brings to mind the Chinese role, if any, the coordination needed, if any, with China in the event of one of these crises on the peninsula. Was this part of the background of the TTX? Did you all find yourselves discussing, we need to let the Chinese know we're doing this or we're doing that? And in general, even if not, from what you've been thinking about, obviously very hard about these things in recent years, what do you think we should be thinking about and talking with our Chinese friends about on the Korea crisis contingencies like this? Thank you.
Admiral?
Right, we did not have a separate Chinese team in this tabletop exercise, so we in control, we had some Chinese specialists who did it. And in general, China was taking, I think, a realistic approach of trying to tell everybody to quiet down, let's negotiate this, let's not resort to force, let's not escalate. So we assumed that in the game we had China trying to restrain North Korea, but it wasn't successful. North Korea was escalating in order to satisfy its demands and all. The non-combatant evacuation question, I think, is really a good one, because, as you heard, China has far more of its citizens in the Republic of Korea than the two other countries, Japan and the United States. And China is becoming sensitive to taking care of its citizens. It had the largest single evacuation of its national citizens from Libya, for example, when the chaos hit in that country. So there will be pressure on the Chinese government to safeguard its citizens who live in what could be a war zone. And of course, the Chinese connections with North Korea are in many cases thicker than are those of the other countries involved. So I think that China's role in a non-combatant evacuation operation will clearly be to tell the North Koreans, don't attack, or you're going to kill a lot of Chinese, and that is going to be a bad thing for us supporting you and all. So I think that will be a politically stabilizing factor amidst all of this chaos of people actually trying to get to a seaport, get to an airport, get out of the country. But you've thought about this also, General Chun. How do you think it'll play out?
I think during this TTX, if we were to find one piece that could have been better, is maybe the Chinese influence that might have on whatever situation that would have occurred. So I think I must admit that I found that the Chinese influence during this TTX was not represented. Yes, sir. But I think that's what we're going to be improving in the next TTX. Having said that, China is a is going to be an influencer, a decisive influencer in whatever happens on the Korean Peninsula, whether we like it or not. So this is something that is part of the Korean karma that I have to live with. So you're lucky you live far away from them.
We got 1 minute left. Let's take one more quick question. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Satoshi Nishihata from the Liberty Magazine and Happy Science Group. I have a question to Dr. Admiral Blair. So you once said it is possible for the United States to think, accept a nuclear-armed North Korea. So I was there at the Harvard Club last year. I think you said that. So could you give us an update about your opinion on this? Thank you.
Did you catch all that? I didn't catch. I'm sorry, I didn't catch the whole question. Can you repeat it?
Admiral Blair once said last year. So it is possible for the United States to accept the nuclear-armed North Korea. So it could be possible. So and I wonder how you think about it currently. Thank you.
No, my idea hasn't changed. I think a nuclear North Korea is containable. I think that I learned from this TTX that a demonstration use of a weapon on an uninhabited island did not have a political gain for North Korea, and that had the North Koreans used their weapon in a way that killed Japanese, Americans, or South Koreans, that the players in the game were ready to retaliate against North Korea. So I think that extended deterrence works, and that the strategy over the long term is to isolate and put pressure on North Korea, put a lot more information into North Korea than we've had in the past, and wait for the crumbling from within, which I think will happen within that country. You heard in the previous panel about the growing corruption, the growing erosion within the North Korean state, and I think like other dictatorships, eventually it'll destroy itself.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, gentlemen, and hopefully this will be the first of several future TTX that have a real influence on the course of U.S. Japan and ROK policy and operations.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be taking a 15-minute break. There are lunch boxes outside for you to take back in the ballroom. So the next session will start at noon, at 12 p.m. Thank you. Also, I would like to remind you that our Twitter